Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 298, recorded at Big Dog Studios in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is made possible by Ace High Graphics. We print custom t-shirts, hats, hoodies, bags, and more using a low-impact, heat-infused printing process you can trust. Get a quote today at acehighgraphics.com. Scent can awaken in us the deepest memories and the strongest and most visceral reactions. That can be a mighty powerful medicine. Today we're talking with Erika Galentin, clinical herbalist at Sovereignty Herbs, about using hydrosols and essential oils to rewrite the story of your well-being. Now here are your hosts.
I'm Candace Hunter.
I'm Patrick Hunter.
And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio. Welcome back, Erika.
Hi, really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad you agreed to come back because there was something you started talking about a little bit the last time we were chatting, and it really got me thinking. I love hydrosols, and I love essential oils, and I love the connection you talked about with the emotions.
Yeah, well, we can dive into some really juicy territory tonight.
Oh, yes, let's do. Because, I mean, it's true. It's true that scent awakens really powerful emotional reactions. And it's been astounding to me, some things like, for instance, the scent of rose. To me, it reminds me immediately, I go straight to my grandmother's garden and the roses. And then my other grandmother's house where she had the scent of roses was always in the air. And that's that, and I remember being like a 6-year-old kid and the warmth and the joy that grandmothers always brought. And Patrick, on the other hand, gets this like immediate, unhappy reaction.
Isn't that interesting? That interesting?
Yeah, there's a specific hand cream that Candace uses that has this smell, and it harkens me back to all of these mean old ladies when I was a kid. They all smelled like that. So she rubs her hands. I'm like, you're not a mean old lady.
Meanwhile, I'm like, Grandma's rose garden. Ooh.
Isn't this, now this is it. This is so fantastic. This is, in essence, the power of aroma in a nutshell. And, and it is about the memory that has been actually gets logged with an emotional reaction in the brain that can then get re-inspired every time we come across that one particular smell. And we can I'd love to dive into a little bit more, like geeking out a little bit more on how that works and how we can actually, use aroma to change our memories and change our emotional reactions. So, I think one of the Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I want to get to how we can change it, but I definitely would like to understand better why. I mean, why does it work that way?
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to even back up a little further if I can.
Okay.
And one of the things that I really want to back up to is this overall recognition for the fact that our emotional well-being and what's going on in the psyche is what Carl Jung, who's a famous depth psychologist, Carl Jung, talked about as the psyche, right? And the psyche, being its own system that's constantly seeking homeostasis. This psyche and the physical body have a deep connection, and there's all different kinds of scientific inquiry fields now that are really focusing on how emotions and the psyche impact the body and vice versa. And so we have to start to really, before we can really tap into the power of what we're going to talk about here, this beautiful, powerful thing, it's also important to really hold space for and recognize the fact that our physical and well-being in the psyche is going to be deeply impacting our physical well-being as well. And this is a quote from Macbeth, Shakespeare's Macbeth, where he says, "Give sorrow words, the grief that does not speak knits up the o'erwrought heart and bids it break." Mm-hmm. And there is such a thing. When I was studying herbal medicine in the UK, I did my dissertation on the grief process and how grief affects physical health.
Oh, yeah.
and how we could use herbs not just corporally, but we could actually use them talismanically to help navigate the grieving process with our clients. And my focus was particularly on rosemary, which has this really wonderful deep folklore about kind of supporting grief and also supporting memory. And a lot of it breaks down to its aromatics, and because of its aromatics. And so there is, we see with, the grieving process, for example, we have, something that's even called broken heart syndrome. And in my research, I in my literature review was able to come up with, huge associations between the grieving process and, things like clinical depression, cardiovascular disease, immune system function issues. And then even like a couple of years ago, really was diving very deeply into shame as a kind of an emotional sequelae.
Yeah.
It's not just one feeling, but it's kind of like this, there's all kinds of umbrella. Shame is kind of an umbrella, but it's around us all the time. It's I think, if I can say so, has really been weaponized by capitalism to keep us afraid and keep us buying stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But shame is actually, starting to come across a lot more. It's being talked a lot more about now on all kinds of levels for a variety of reasons. But it has been shown in these kind of preliminary studies to really induce a pro kind of inflammatory effect. And so we have this, we're starting to get really strong examples of very, deep, emotional processes that most human beings experience at one time or another, actually having really profound impacts on physical health, right?
Yeah.
And so, as coming from this perspective as an herbalist, right? So I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a counselor. I don't have, I'm not a social worker, and I'm not an MD. So I'm not prescribing anything. But how am I, as a clinical herbalist, going to be working with my clients who are, undergoing these deep emotional transitions and are obviously having a very significant impact on their physical health? How do we start working with that space? How can we use the tools that we have to support them in doing that work? And so, to me, this is really where we can dive into this idea of aroma from plants, because my goodness gracious, they have so much to give us.
They so do. Yes.
Yeah. So should I just go for it? Should I start talking about it? Because I have so much I can say.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Okay, great.
I mean, how does this all work?
Right. So our sense of smell, or our sense of olfaction, is actually mediated by a nerve called the olfactory nerve. And this is one of 12 cranial nerves that we have that actually only has a sensory function. Most of the other cranial nerves, all of the other cranial nerves, I should say, actually also have a motor function, right? So this is the only sense that we have that is just a sense.
It dominates, and it is hard. Highway.
Right. And it is it goes straight into the brain. And unlike other information coming in from the nervous system, which is usually filtered and relayed by something called the thalamus, our sense of smell, so olfactory information, goes straight into the brain, and without being processed in the thalamus, goes straight into an area referred to often as the limbic system. And this includes, a variety and sundry different organs that are really responsible for what they believe is the emotional response and the creation of a memory as a result of that smell.
Okay.
So our sense of smell is actually hardwired into our emotions and our memories. Hardwired, like rapid fire, straight in there before it even gets processed by anything else. So there's this thing they call the hedonic response, which, do you remember going to the doctor when you were a kid and like sitting on the table and they would do the reflex test with your knee?
Yeah.
With a hammer, and your leg would flip up, right?
Yeah.
Right. So this response, we smell something, and before we can even give that thing a name, before we can even consciously recognize what we're smelling. So this happens quickly, very quickly,
really fast.
Before we can even consciously, recognize what we are smelling, we are having a reflex response to it, which includes an emotional reaction and a memory. It happens instantaneously. And, think about it. There's no other interaction with the world, sensory interaction with the world around us that behaves so fast and so acutely and so potently when it comes to our emotional lives. So the physiology is just mind-blowing to the point where they don't even actually know yet. And there's people who study this physiology. They don't actually know yet how a molecule that gets to these wonderful pieces of tissue, which are kind of located right between the eyes, and how that tissue then is able to, in the nerves that go through it, translate the aromatic molecule into a nerve signal. They don't even know yet what that physiology is, right? I mean, it's like really cryptic stuff.
Primal. That's very primal.
Very, very primal. Now they say that, okay, so dogs, for example, they've got way more, coding for way more smells than we do. But they say that, for the human, that we have this, we can smell up to 10,000 plus different types of aromas, and that most of them are actually bad. We're programmed to be able to smell,
to recognize all the bad stuff,
to recognize all the bad stuff and have an emotional reaction to it, right? So some olfactory physiologists believe that this hard wiring is it is old. It is an old sense.
Yeah.
And it was very much involved in actually keeping us alive. Don't eat that, that's going to kill you, or you should probably stay away from that animal because it doesn't smell right.
Yeah.
And so, our sense of smell at one point, they say, or they believe from an evolutionary standpoint, was very powerful in keeping us alive, especially with the consumption of toxic substances. So you can think about that. We are programmed to smell more bad things than we are actually to be able to smell good things. So I think that's kind of interesting.
That is really interesting. It's really interesting too when you think about how a lot of people who struggle with things like depression and anxiety, one of the things they struggle with is in their thinking, always looking at the negative instead of the positive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so closely tied to what our sense of smell is naturally already designed to do. Recognize the negative, avoid it. And, that's interesting.
It is interesting. And what else is interesting on that note is that when we start to look at our sense of smell in regards to emotional well-being, there's a massive connection between the loss of sense of smell and, mental wellness or mental health issues. So there's definitely, we see this with cognitive function. So in Alzheimer's disease and dementia, there's often an associated loss of sense of smell. Yeah. They've actually found in the research as well that there can be a connection between long-term clinical depression and an alteration in your sense of smell. We also have, mental health conditions like schizophrenia, where you get completely different. You're smelling an orange, and really, what you're perceiving is rotten eggs. And so there's a lot of olfactory miscommunication that happens with mental health conditions like schizophrenia. And so, and there's also research, most importantly, and I think this is really interesting for the times that we're living in now, that oftentimes people who lose their sense of smell, right, who actually have lost their sense of smell, that it actually does impact their emotional well-being deeply. And there's probably a multivariate reasons why this is the case. But I think about all the people out there who have, contracted COVID, and who, while they were ill, have lost their sense of smell and who have not gotten it back.
Yes.
And so, not to say that we know how long loss of sense of smell due to COVID is going to last. We just don't have that data. But, it does say to me, and to think about losing your ability to smell, even if it makes you think of, nasty old women. To lose your ability to have this sense in our lives every single day is, it's kind of like, oh God, I don't know what I would do if I couldn't smell things.
Right.
And, similarly, it also makes me think about all of I have so much I can say about this, so I'm like chatty, but I even think about, all of the artificial scent that is used now everywhere around us. It's being pumped at us. You walk down the laundry detergent aisle at the grocery store, and it's like overwhelming.
Yeah, we avoid that aisle.
That's a headache aisle, man.
Yeah,
because it's just too much.
So and it's interesting because this also leads into the fact that aroma is so powerful that they're even now using it to influence consumer behavior. I mean, the one of the most classic examples is, Burger King pumping out the smell of its grills out into the air around the building. Yeah. Because that smell of cooking meat, not for everybody, obviously, but for a lot of people, makes them want to go eat that food.
Oh yeah, even people who are vegetarian. I've spoken to people who are like lifelong vegetarian, and they're like, yeah, that makes me want to eat. Not necessarily am I going to go into Burger King and buy food, but it gets the salivary glands moving. It causes your body to just react.
Right. And so it's interesting because we can think about this shadow side of aroma that, we have artificial scent, and we have, we even have, kind of a being manipulated as consumers via scent happening as well. There's a whole side of this that is this amazing primal sense that's so powerful, that's actually being used in these really, negative ways. Yeah. So it's in everything that we're doing, and it's so interesting because it's one of those senses that people just tend to kind of ignore.
I know. We act as if it's meaningless. It's the least. Yes, it's the least cared for or favored or talked about sense, but it's probably the most powerful one.
Yeah. Well, and it's like I've heard this excuse. Oh, well, we don't smell things as well as dogs, so our sense of smell is crap. And I'm like, what?
What?
Yeah. Just because we don't have like all the olfactory receptors, we just have less, doesn't mean that our sense of smell is absolutely meaningless. There's so much power in our ability to smell, and how we can use the sense of smell to really impact our lives in really beautiful ways.
Yes. So, well, for me, the sense of smell is definitely a go-to place when I need comfort. Especially, I'm gonna say it, even though it sounds really stupid. When I am like totally been doing a ton of emotional eating and I realize it, and I wake up to the fact that I've just gained 10 pounds and perhaps I need to stop eating all the cookies and other not so good for me things. The first thing I do is pull out my incense or my essential oils or the hydrosols, and I start going to that every time that craving or that desire to eat shows up. It doesn't take very long before what I'm craving is the smell and not the food. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing how fast it works.
Yeah, it really is. It really, really is. And so we have we have this period of time when, we're our quote unquote formative years, where a lot of these, you guys spoke about at the beginning of the show, like with Rose, it reminds you happy grandmas, and then it reminds you of not so happy grandmas. So, right. So it's interesting because these impressions that we have that, and sometimes we can smell something, we don't even know what it is, but we're like, oh my gosh. And that reminds you exactly of a particular moment in time, and the memory comes flooding back to you. That we have a lot of this programming that takes place, in us while we're still very young. So a lot of our formative years and our interactions with aroma while we're young children up until our teenage years is really, really critical. Yeah. And I think about, this is a really funny thing to think about, but I have a nose piercing, and so I use a saline solution sometimes to clean it, right? And I went to the store because I ran out of the stuff I usually use, and I went to the baby aisle because they have they have the saline for babies, Yeah. And I didn't read the bottle because I just whatever, I just grabbed it, and then when I took it home, to my chagrin, there was the most horrible like synthetic smell that they had put into this preparation. And I thought, my God, they're putting this into a baby's nose, and this smells like plastic Barbie dolls. it's really bad.
That's bad.
I almost thought, I have to write to the company. This is terrible. This is the mistreatment. This is the mistreatment of babies,
Yes.
But it's interesting. So
Yeah.
so we create all of these really formative memories at the beginning of our lives.
Mhm.
But what's amazing about our sense of smell is that it's plastic. It's not static.
Yeah.
So even though, for example, Patrick, you really don't really appreciate the smell of rose,
Mhm.
there is a way to actually change those emotions and create new memories to go with it.
Ooh, I like that. I really like that.
Now,
Yeah.
to be fair, I don't know if it's just the rose in that lotion. There could be something else in there.
Good try.
No, because I mean, in food that we've had, there's gulab jamun, which is an Indian dessert. It uses rose water. I don't have a problem with that. So
Yeah.
I think it's something in that hand lotion. Candace says it's rose, but I don't know. Anyway, go ahead with your.
How do I change him?
You spent the time and money on a new website. You made all the right choices, or seem to, and you still do not have the website traffic you need to make your website create money for you. MudPodDesign.com can help you get the traffic to your website to have it start making money for you. Get a free SEO audit at their website, mudpoddesign.com/free-SEO-audit.
Well, so this is a really interesting point. And I would say that I don't know if there's actually been any studies about specifically changing somebody's emotional response to a smell, but it is known that after time, things that we find to be disgusting and smell bad, we can actually learn to think that they smell good. So a really good example of this is, looking at like the smells that come from decay. And of course, what is appealing to us as a sense of smell is not there. We do have some similarities across humanity, but there is also cultural context here as well. And so the smell of rotting food, and a good example I think of this is the fish sauce, for example.
Oh yeah.
That some people are like, it's like, this smells terrible. Right. If you were to just pass it by on the street and never had smelled it before, someone like myself, who's, kind of a white Western woman, would be like, ew, gag me with a spoon. Where's the dead fish?
Yeah.
But over time, I remember being a child and being introduced to fish sauce, and I was like, no way, you've got to be kidding me. And now I appreciate the smell of fish sauce. Right. Yes. So over time we can change. People know, and researchers know that we can actually change what we deem as unpleasurable as as a sense to something that is desirable. So it is possible, but the pathway is going to be different depending on what it is, and the benefits and the intentionality behind that desired change. So maybe you just need to waft your lotion under your husband's nose while he's sleeping and massage his feet at the same time, or I don't know. Notice I said feet.
I was going to say
a better association than what I have. So there you go.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that so one of the ways that I've really, how do we utilize aroma from plants then to have an impact on the psyche? And I think one of the places I'd really like to send listeners to is to the work of Kathy Skipper and Florian Berkmeyer of Aromanosis, at aromatherapy.com, because this is really, they have beautifully captured this terrain, and they've created this really accessible way of working with aroma and the psyche. And to me, their work has been foundational as far as how I have brought aroma into my practice, and how I have learned how to distill aroma from plants. And so I do encourage people to check out what they're doing over there. It's really beautiful stuff. But we have this wonderful sense of smell, but we also have on the other side of this whole idea of like, what is the psyche? How does the psyche function? And what is the psyche all about? And trying to then connect the two, how do we use aroma to influence the psyche? And so when we think about the psyche itself, I'm talking about it from a kind of Jungian perspective. So this is looking at the work of Carl Jung, and his predecessors since then. and looking at the psyche, it's not the mind. Some people refer to it as the mind, but it's more than just that. It is the totality. What Carl Jung says here: by psyche, I understand the totality of all psychic processes, conscious and unconscious.
Yeah.
And it's more than just our emotions. The psyche is this kind of thought to be the starting point for all of human experience.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Carl Jung believed, and that I really have enjoyed about learning his work, was that the psyche itself is this self-regulating system.
Mm-hmm.
So, rather like the body, we've got, we have homeostatic and allostatic mechanisms in place for both our protection, but also for our development, right? Our development.
Yeah.
And so the psyche is the same, that, it's seeking to maintain a balance between opposing qualities while constantly striving for growth. And this growth is something that, that Carl Jung referred to as the process of individuation, or becoming the self with a capital S. And so we're on this journey in this idea, in this psychological realm. We are on this. Our psyches are on a journey. We are on a journey with our psyches. Our bodies are our vessel, and the two of them are interacting constantly. Yeah. So, and just like our sense of smell, our psyches have the capacity for growth and change. They're not static. They don't just stay still or stay one thing. So, so that's kind of where the two, come together. And this is going to all make sense in a second, I promise. But one of the things that, I think is really fascinating about the way that I distill aromatics and the hydrosols that I create here at Sovereignty Herbs is I really like to utilize this idea that aroma is usually logged into the brain with a memory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when the aroma comes in, we have an emotional response and a memory that's kind of logged, that then is associated with that aroma, that very specific aroma.
Right. And
when I think about it, well, what is a memory? What exactly is a memory? A memory is a story, right?
Yeah.
And so when I'm looking at this from a psychological perspective, or from like a depth psychology perspective, one of the things that the psyche loves the most is our myths and stories.
Oh yeah.
And this is where we find our archetypes. This is where we find inherited this kind of collective unconscious that Carl Jung talks about. And so my thoughts were, when I started distilling and I started putting these pieces together, that, okay, so if aroma can carry stories into the mind, why don't we try to assign a story to that aroma? Let's create a story surrounding a narrative, surrounding that. So you already have that story that can then go in with the aroma, right?
Right.
And I think that it's been very, very useful, because one of the things I do with that when I'm distilling hydrosols, for example, is that I will bring in all these different elements that each have their own meaning, right? And their own relevance to the story that I'm weaving as I'm distilling. So I'm thinking about distilling the soul of the plant, right, which is its aroma, and this very beautiful alchemical, process of distillation. And in this process, which takes a really long time, I'm also writing a story with that plant. And at the end of that story, or at the end of that distillation, we come to the end of the story. And with the way that I distill, that hydrosol has all kinds of meaning that has been distilled with it, because I've brought in symbology from things like the tarot. I really, I think about what's going on astrologically, and I bring in, again, this is all archetypal.
Yeah.
This is all psyche food. I call it psyche food. So I bring in what's going on with the cosmos. I bring in, different stones, different things I found in the forest surrounding my home, different found feathers, and looking at the symbology of the animal that's there, that's with us. And I remember at one time I was distilling, and it was at night. Sometimes I distill in the middle of the night, and just for fun, and to bring that energetic in. And there was this wonderful tree frog that just wanted to hang out with me the whole time.
Wonderful.
And he was just jumping around the altar space. I created this like altar space for the distillation, and he was like jumping around the altar space. And I got up close to him, and I got to take his picture. And he was just looking at me like, "What are you doing? This is really cool." And then occasionally he'd chirp and make his noises, you know. And for whatever reason, the tree frog was there, and so the tree frog became a part of the story of that hydrosol. And so when this is over, I have this list of keywords that come out from all of these elements that I have brought from the folklore of the plant, from the astrology, from the tarot, from things like the tree frog. And those get put on a card that go with that hydrosol. And so with my clients, I will just hand them a set of cards, and I'll say, just go through these. Don't think about it too hard. Look at the photo and look at the keywords and pick one that really speaks to you.
Yeah.
And I try to not make them overthink it too much.
Right.
But then they pick one, and I go, okay, this is your hydrosol. You keep that card, and this is the story that you need right now. Nice. So every time they go to use that, every time they go to use that hydrosol, they've got the imagery that I create with the card, as well as these keywords to really remind them of the narrative that they really need at that time. And so this is often how I'm starting to use hydrosols in my clinical practice. It's guided by my clients.
Right.
I'm not saying, oh, here, you need this, you should use this hydrosol. I'm letting them choose based on the imagery and the keywords that have come from that distillation process.
But a lot of times we know deep down, and I'll bet you anything, you know, you hand it to a client, say, this is the card you chose. This is the hydrosol that goes with it. This is the story. They take a sniff of it, and it'll resonate probably really, really fast. You know, I mean, they'll know that it's right there, because we know what we really need. We just don't always have a conscious capacity to see it.
Yeah. And it's great because, you know, although hydrosols have a limited shelf life, and they're like, you know, they're water based, so they can go off, you know, more quickly than a tincture or essential oil or whatever. But they are, you know, they come in these small enough bottles that they're practical for, you know, use. Yeah. Where, like, you know, you carry the hydrosol around with you. I just don't leave it in a hot car. Yeah. But you carry the hydrosol around with you, and it's like you need it for a second. Yeah. You can just pull it out and just spritz, 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 spritz. Breathe it in. Remember the keywords from your card. Remember the imagery, and move on. Yeah. And so you have this really, like you mentioned in our last interview, you talked about how you feel like hydrosols kind of are like the sea washing over the sand. Yeah. It's exactly that. It's really quite beautiful. Yeah. 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 That's powerful. It is. Well, and it's interesting too, because I think when we're looking at, one of the things I love about hydrosols is this watery nature that they have. And, you know, again, coming from the depth psychology perspective, and this idea of, the alchemy that comes up a lot in Carl Jung's work. And one of the stages, alchemical stages, is solutio, which is the dissolving that happens in these. And the solutio in the psyche is the emotional response, is the emotional realm. It is solutio is water. Yeah. It is water, the ultimate solvent. And so, you know, we think about our emotional well-being, and it is a very watery place. Yes. Just like our unconscious, our deep unconscious is this very watery, deep ocean place. And so, you know, it makes sense to me that if we're going to use aroma, to help support the psyche, that the water is actually there physically, you know, in that work. And so it's a really nice way to bring the alchemy to my clients as well. Yeah. And I believe that all of the work that you do as you're distilling, you're infusing that water with that energy. And there have been studies that talk about the structure of water changes depending on the environment it's in and the emotional stuff that's going on around it. So what you're creating there really it influences the hydrosol in a really powerful and positive way. I believe so. And then that new structure is carried through the scent deeply into the body and the psyche. I mean, both at the same time. So exactly. Yeah, that's definitely how I feel about it too. Yeah. And you know, I mean, a lot of people could pass it off as just a lot of woo, but that's fine with me. I don't mind a lot of woo sometimes. And I'm also very, very grounded in science also. So I think there's room for all of it, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the woo-woo works. It's the first 2 letters of works. It works. You know, I'm just going to put that out there.
Is that a bumper sticker?
A new T-shirt design.
Yeah.
Yes, woo works. I love it. I love it.
And where can people get your book?
Oh yes.
Oh yes. So I wrote a book a while back. We haven't even talked about the book. Well, we talked about the book last time. Maybe we should link them to the. Oh,
well,
that's
it
great.
Doesn't hurt to say it again.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Okay. Well, so I did write a book a little while ago called The Family Guide to Aromatherapy: A Safe Approach to Essential Oils for the Holistic Home, which is a really great starting place for individuals who are just now getting into essential oils and are wanting to approach essential oils from a safe place. And from a kind of a safe perspective. And it's a really great book. It takes you through basically all of the different age groups and all of the different oils that are appropriate or even not appropriate for those age groups. And there's a whole bunch of really wonderful recipes in there and like fun things to get you started. So you can find that book on my website. That's sovereigntyherbs.com/shop. You can also find it on Amazon, as well as some of the other big book suppliers. But that being said, sometimes it's better to just buy from the author themselves, and that way I can sign it for you.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess with that,
put an herb on it.
Oh, I forgot to say it. I dropped it. Okay, I'm ready now.
I was on the thing. Okay, ready. Try it again. Ready?
Okay. Put an herb on it.
Yeah.
I think I have to have a cue card next time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome.
That would be helpful.
That would be awesome.
We should actually build a cue card. Thank you so much for being with us, Erika. It's been wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.